Today, we're going to be running through some beginner training for a standard user inside of Zoho Projects. So this video is going to be a little bit different than a lot of the videos we make, where we're generally focused on configuration and customization of an app. Today, instead, we're going to take a look at projects from the perspective of a day-to-day user, ideally for two main purposes. One, if you're about to be a user of Zoho Projects, this video is probably going to be super useful in being able to navigate and understand the tool. And then the other side is, if you are somebody who's setting it up, it is really useful to have an understanding of how people are really going to use and interact with the application. So I really do hope that it ends up being useful. So with that, let's jump right on in. So we're going to get started here today with a bit of a tour of the app. We're not going to show every single tab because, being candid, most people don't use all of them. We're going to start here on the homepage real quick. Really, there's not a lot to see on the homepage. Oftentimes, you're going to use this pretty lightly. It breaks into two categories. You've got portfolio, which kind of gives you an idea of the types of projects that are associated with you. And then you also have personal, which is much more on like a task level. If it were up to me, I'd probably rename these and call this like projects instead of portfolio and tasks instead of personal, because that's really what it means in practice. The personal tab can be a good jump off point for accessing your tasks at a quick view. But I'm going to show you in a little bit a much better way to see your task list that I think is what most people end up doing. For a day-to-day user, you're not really too worried about reports. Really, the handful that are in here are about workload planning, actual versus planned hours. So there are a couple ones that are useful for managers. But for you, you're really going to spend a lot of your time looking at tasks and completing those tasks. Now, an important thing to note is that tasks are going to be organized into projects. And a project is generally going to be one type of service or activity that you're offering, either internally to your company. A lot of people use this to like plan a marketing campaign, or oftentimes these are going to be projects that you're completing for a client. And so when we open up a project, this is the core thing we're going to see. You're going to see a bunch of different tasks with the owner, the status, the start date, and the due date, as well as a couple other fields around priority and some of these work log management tools. Before we jump into the tasks too specifically, I want to give you an understanding of how things are organized inside of an individual project. So the highest level of organization is the project itself. Within that project, you'll have one or multiple different milestones. Now, a milestone is essentially like a phase of a project. The main things about a milestone is that they have a start date and an end date, right? Some number of days that we're expecting to get all of the tasks within it completed. And then we'll have some type of status, identifying if it's active, open, in progress, etc. Now, within a milestone, you'll have one or multiple different task lists. So a task list is really just a subset of tasks that roll up to a milestone. So here inside of our initial kind of planning milestone, we have some preliminary activities, and then we have a requirement analysis. Now, if I go one level deeper into the task list itself, now I see those actual tasks. These are those individual work items that I'll complete and log time against and actually work on. So as a day-to-day user, you're going to spend most of your time thinking about tasks, but I did want to show that overall hierarchy because it will show up in different types of views. So here, looking at the list of tasks for this particular project, you'll see up here in the top left, I can group these in different ways. One of them would be based on milestone, where I can see the grooming and planning stage, and then I can see these two task lists within it. The other is saying, hey, maybe I don't really care about milestones and I just want to see it on a list basis. Then I can switch over to the task list view and see it here. All the same information, just minus the identification of which milestone things are a part of. The last grouping option is to group by none, basically meaning just show me all my tasks in a list. I generally don't really recommend this one. Oftentimes it's useful to at least know what type of task list you're working within. I'll tell you though, a lot of people do keep it on the milestone view because you just get the most amount of information possible. And it really isn't adding that much clutter. It's really just adding like these gray headers being the milestone name, and then the white headers being the task list name within that milestone. Before we keep going, I do want to ask, if you find the video useful so far, be sure to like and subscribe down below. While you're down there, leave a comment with any questions, feedback, or additional video requests. We always love to see those. And last but not least, head on over to Zenatta.com and click on Book a Meeting if you'd like to talk about how we can help on your Zoho implementation. Let's get right back to it. While we're talking about the list view where we can see these tasks, I also do want to show there's a few different views that are in play. We can visualize our tasks in what's called a Gantt chart. So this is basically a view that's going to show one of these blue lines for each and every task. And they're going to be plotted into essentially a calendar view, right? So we can see up here, this little column would be like our 16th of November. And the blue line starts there because that's where our start date is set. If I were to update this start date to the 17th, now it's bumped back one day. And astute viewers might notice that a bunch of other tasks also got moved when I moved this initial one, right? So if I were to bring this back into the previous week, all these follow-on tasks move forward. And if I move it back to the 17th, they'll all push themselves backwards. The reason that that's happening is because I've created what are called dependencies between these tasks. Now, there's a few ways to look at a dependency. I'm going to show it here from inside of an individual task. A dependency basically just means before I start on the project agreement sign-off task, I need to complete the blueprint sign-off task. So it's basically just a way to quickly and easy visualize and connect the start and due dates of various different tasks. Basically what this would mean is that if I'm late to complete this task, I'm probably going to be late to complete all the rest of those. You'll also notice here that these task due dates are not trying to, or task start dates are trying to avoid weekends. There's a few settings that you'll configure to get it to do that, but generally speaking, that's going to be on because, hey, not likely that we're going to start work on a Saturday unless a business rule for your company is that work is happening on those weekends. The last view that's relevant here is the Kanban view. The Kanban view basically gives you a way to look at all the various tasks grouped up based on their status, and you can actually move them from one status to another based on this Kanban view, right? So if I were to go ahead and find my, blueprint sign-off task, which was one of my initial important tasks, I can just click and drag this over to in progress, and that status gets updated. Now, I'll tell you, my recommendation, generally speaking, is to live primarily in the list view. Now, the reason for that is because most projects need to happen in a certain order. Now, this is not a one-size-fits-all rule. There are plenty of scenarios where any task can be done in any order. But I'll tell you, most of the time, the reason that you're using Zoho Projects is because you need these dependencies, which implies a certain order of operations. What you'll notice is if I do look at this Kanban view, by default, it's not really like sorting these open tasks in a way that's very useful for me. Like, we know immediately when we look at the list view that blueprint sign-off needs to happen first. But here, I don't really see it that way. Like, yeah, here is that start date or here's that due date, but it's not super obvious. And now you can come in and set up some additional settings and adjust the way that things are sorting and kind of filtering here. But as a general rule of thumb, I always find that the list view is going to be the main place that I'm going to work out of when I'm inside of Zoho Projects. Let's open up a task and actually take a look at some of what can happen in here. So inside of a task, this is like one task record that we're looking at. Over here on the left, it's going to show me other tasks based on the task lists, right? So definitely an important way to keep organized. Up here at the top, I can make any updates to status. I can add descriptions. These are oftentimes going to be pre-populated, but this is like an open space to type whatever I need to. You can include things like bulleted lists, so like 1, 2, and 3. And then when I save that, it's going to log here directly against the task. Down here below, we have some of the field data for a task. Again, the status, the owner, right? This is like if you're responsible for this or not, you'd be in that owner field. The start date, the due date, the duration, which is just calculated, any priority information, and very importantly, some of these time information pieces. So here we see we have some estimated work hours for this particular task. This one, we're going to work 24 hours a day for 5 days. Well, that doesn't seem very realistic. So maybe we want to move that. We'll say we're going to work 5 hours a day on this task for those 5 days. That's now going to update and say, hey, our estimate of the work hours for this is 25 work hours. Down here below, we have a bunch of options for other types of related data. So I can leave comments connected to this particular task. There can be many different comments left by many different people. They all get timestamped and logged of who left this comment and when. You can create subtasks. So if you had multiple kind of child things that need to be done to complete this parent, you can log those here. I will tell you, they're not super commonly used. Most of the time, what people do instead is create full tasks and link them via dependencies. These can be useful sometimes for like instructions, right? So if I'm going to like replace a breaker box, it's like step 1, cut the power. Step 2, open the box, right? Some of those types of things can go in here. Log hours is very important. So to log time against the task, we can do that in a couple different ways. One of them is just by clicking on a little clock button. So here from the list view, I can start a timer and I can stop a timer. In this case, I'm under 30 seconds, so it's going to discard that. What I'll do here is I'll actually let this run in the background. The other way to do it is just to manually add time logs. So by going into a task, clicking on log hours, I can click add time log, or I can add them directly through this little table. So like, hey, I did 2 hours on this date and the time was billable, right? Again, the other way is that if you have this timer running and then you go ahead and stop the timer, it's now going to say, hey, you want to log that, and is it or is it not billable? Now, as I go to log this time, I can leave notes. I'll tell you, if you're a standard user, one way to make your manager very happy is to log what I did during this time in the notes. That makes people very happy. A client might ask in the future and say, hey, where'd all this time go, right? Being able to actually say, we went here, this is what we did, this is why we did it, is very valuable. Specific documents can be associated to a task. This can be an image, a PDF, a Word document, etc. We can also check any of those dependencies like I showed you earlier, and we can see things like a full timeline associated with this task, right? So you can see before this demo, I went in here and updated the status back to open on these so that I could have kind of like a clean slate for the project. Then we moved it to in progress. Then we moved it back to open, right? As I was showing you the Kanban view. And we can see all of that here associated with the task. There is one other type of record. Not everybody uses it, but I am going to show it here, called an issue. An issue is kind of like its own type of task, right? So let's say that I wanted to do the blueprint sign off and it was something like our blueprint license expired. I can't log in, right? Something like that. I can log this as an issue, right? So it's not a task in and of itself. It's something that's stopping me from completing this task, right? Now, your business is going to have rules on if you do or don't use issues, but I do just want to show them. They do go into kind of their own list, and oftentimes there's going to be like a default person who's going to be responsible for getting these issues completed, but they can be tracked against these tasks, and they can be, managed with their own set of statuses independent of the status of the task. Oftentimes, creating some type of issue should update this status, usually blocked or I'm stuck or etc., but not always. Last thing I want to show here, now that we've showed kind of looking at the tasks themselves, is just a few other options that are on this page. So up here in the top left, we have a bunch of different views. A view inside of Zoho Projects is basically a filter, right? It's a way that I can get some type of slice of these tasks that are relevant to me. So a really common one, and we're going to show this in a few different places, is my open tasks, right? If you're a day-to-day user, these are the main things that you are responsible for. So my open tasks basically is where the owner is you or includes you if there's multiple owners, and the status is not closed. Now, I do want to highlight a bit of like a naming convention thing here, that for my open, there's kind of like a status behind a status that exists in Zoho Projects. Open, in testing, testing, and UAT done are all open as far as these filters are concerned because they're not closed, right? So basically anything that is not closed should be included in our open statuses. So when I move this to in progress, it stays in my view, even when I give it a refresh. If I move this to closed and then I give it a refresh, now it's gone, right? Because it's no longer satisfying one of those multiple open statuses that exist inside of this view. So as you go through and you look at these, there's various different tasks that you'll want to get a view on. Today's task is also a really valuable one that basically looks at where a start date is applicable for you. Like right now, I'm recording this on November 3rd. So it's very possible that it would be inappropriate for me to start on this task, right? Maybe I know I'm waiting for sign off or I'm waiting to get certain access. And so like, man, I don't need to see this thing that has nothing to do with what I need to do right now. So I might go to today's tasks, right? And now we see, okay, well, nothing's in there because nothing's really due today. But if I were to move this to today, it looks like we have our predecessor, then things will start to show up. Last thing I'll show you up here in the top right, this sneaky little filter thing here allows us to filter tasks on really any of those fields that we went over. So the status, the owner, the priority, that's a really common one. So it's like, hey, show me if I have anything high priority on my list. It's like, okay, these are high priority, but they're for a couple months out. I don't need to be too concerned about them right this minute. Now, jumping out of the project, because everything we've talked about so far is just in one individual project, right? But as we know, you're going to have tasks that spread across many different projects because some of this work needs to happen in the future, but we know that there's other things we could do on other projects right now. So inside of this this tasks list under the overview section, this is really where you're going to spend a lot of your time if you're that day-to-day user who's logging in and completing work. Because now we can group these up by a variety of different things. We can group them by project. We can group them by task list. Again, kind of removing the project view. I almost never recommend doing that. Or we can group them by none. When I was inside of an individual project, I kind of poo-pooed the idea of grouping by none. There is actually a use case here of why you might group by none for the task list as a whole. What I'm going to do real quick is launch a second project so that we have two sets of data in here. And I'll make the case of why occasionally you might actually want to group this by none. All right, so we've launched another project. We now have our software development project, and we have this digital marketing project. And we're going to take a look at how these play together when we're inside of our overall task list. Here I have this group by project. What you'll see is up at the top, I've got digital marketing, I've got my milestone, and then I've got my task list, where digital marketing here is that project name. And then all the way down here, I now have my software development project. Astute viewers, you're noticing an issue with this. This is no longer sorting all of my tasks based on the start date. Now I actually have a task that I'm not supposed to even start until December 13th, and it's actually showing higher on my list than this task that I'm supposed to start on November 24th, right? So there is actually a bit of a downside to grouping them in any way on my overall task list. Because if I go to none, now, rather than having that header of a project name, the project name goes in here as a column, and I can see these ones are for digital marketing. Then I have my software development project, and then I have more digital marketing, and you kind of get that back and forth. But now I have a much better ability to sort and manage my tasks completely based on the start date. Where if I am inside of one of those project groupings, it's not quite so easy, right? I now no longer can sort my entire list based on that start date. So a lot of the times for a day-to-day user, we do actually go in and sort by none, right? Because now you can essentially go in and say, hey, I'm working on my tasks from top to bottom. I'm getting them done one at a time. I do need to be intentional and make sure I'm in the right project, right? Because there is that risk of like, hey, they're not quite broken out quite so obviously, but it does just give you that ability to make sure that you're doing kind of like a first in, first out, and getting the things done first that need to be actually started on that date. And you could apply that same logic here for due date or start date, right? Due date might even make more sense if you're a little behind, like, hey, I'm late to start this one, but its due date is further in the future. So I'm actually going to go ahead and sort them by due date. A lot of the times, these are going to be the same, but there are cases where they can be different. So when we're actually looking at all of our tasks, going into this task view on the left and jumping into My Open, and then grouping by none is a very common way to get this done. You will have those same options around viewing them in a Gantt chart, viewing them in a Kanban, and applying any of the filters that you need. So if you did want to go in and say, hey, show me all my tasks, and then also show me the highest priority ones, you can do that all using this view here. And it's going to be kind of that main home base for you as you are working on any of these projects. I am going to quickly show issues as well. So if we were to have an issue here on one of these tasks, those are all going to live under my issues section, right? So here I can see I've added this example. It's now in my issues. Again, not assigned to me. So if I were to go into like my open, it would not show up. If I go to all open, it will. If it's assigned to me, of course, when I jump back into my open, it will show up there. So like when in doubt, you're probably seeing this as a common theme. My open is a great place to start, right? If you're ever not sure about what you need to do in projects, go to those tasks, go to those issues, start at the top, and make sure that you're working things in that fashion from top to bottom based on those start and due dates. Now, as a quick tour, you can see all milestones under this milestones section. Generally, there's more of a manager view where they want to check like, hey, how are we tracking against an end date and the percentage of tasks that have been completed against that. For the managers, while you're looking at this, be a little careful with this progress bar. This is the count of tasks completed. We all know task 1 through 5 might be quick and easy. Task 6 is going to take us 100 hours, right? So you do oftentimes want to drill in and see like which tasks are open. Are they the quick ones or are they the easy ones, right? Because there again is just a really big difference there. Time logs gives you a way to kind of audit and make sure that you've logged all of your time within a certain period. These are also visible for managers. You can add time logs here by going in, clicking add, picking the task, and then logging the time. I generally like to strongly recommend just logging it against the task as you're working it, either via the timer or via the manual log. Check with your manager to see which one they prefer. Going and doing it here adds a lot of clicks, and you really want to get in the habit of like work that task list. That's the primary place that I'm going to go. Expenses is going to be relevant if you do have expense tracking turned on. This is basically an embed of Zoho Expense where I can add an expense associated with a project and actually get that submitted to my manager for approval and payment, right? So I can come in and I can pick these types of things that are related to the rest of my project's data. Down here below, if you are regularly accessing projects directly, so not under the task list, but actually in an individual project, it'll show about 10 of your most recent projects that you've accessed here within this recent projects tab. I do use this a lot, right? Because oftentimes like we're kind of hands-on on one big thing, and then we can see all of those here at a glance without having to go into projects and find it within this particular view. Outside of that, the last tab that I will show is the collaboration tab. Again, it's going to depend on your particular business and company if you're heavily using this, but this is basically going to coalesce a bunch of stuff, right? So the feed is like everything that's going on, right? So, hey, we assigned an issue, we updated these statuses, we created a new project, right? Everything that's going on within the scope of the projects account. This is going to filter down based on things that you're able to see. So if there's certain projects inside of Zoho Projects that you've not been added to, that won't show up here. These are filterable by project. So if you're like, hey, I just need to know like everything that's gone on with our software development project, I can filter that down and I can see it. I can also then look at status updates as well as the overall activity stream. This one, I'll tell you, is a lot. It's a bit overkill. It's kind of like every single thing that's happened ever. This one here is pretty useful, and you can leave comments where you're like, hey, dude, this totally isn't finished. And then I could add that comment. I could jump into that task and make that status update. We also do have a tab here for the calendar. Now, the calendar in Zoho Projects. It can be a bit overwhelming, right? Because what you're really seeing here is these big red ones are like our various milestones here. So if I had to click on this, it'll jump me into that milestone. And then you'll also see individual tasks, right? So they do color code it. What I will say, realistically, is I have 2 projects in here right now. So maybe we could make sense of this. If you have like 50 projects in here, it does get a bit overkill. There's a lot on here. And so sometimes you end up kind of filtering this down, right? To see like, hey, just show me the milestones, just show me the tasks, right? Like, I don't need to see every single thing. Or like, show me the calendar for this project and just the milestones, and then click find. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. I can like actually read this now. So while it is useful, it does get a bit overwhelming. So do remember that you have the option to filter this, because without the filtering, it's just going to be so many lines stacked on top of each other. It's not going to make a lot of sense. Chat is the last tab here. If you are using something like Zoho Click, you can easily just start a thread or a channel via Zoho Click directly here from inside of Zoho Projects, and those messages will go out. You can add multiple people to these. You can start voice and video calls directly through Zoho Projects. Again, all just leveraging Zoho Click behind the scenes. So very useful if you are using Click. If not, probably not going to get a ton out of this chat tab. With that, I think we've covered here pretty much everything that we need to cover for a standard user in Zoho Projects. The big takeaway is, when in doubt, go to tasks, go to My Open, and sort them on due date, right? If you start by doing that, you're going to be leaps and bounds more adept at using Zoho Projects than the average user. So I do hope that that sinks in as we're going through this walkthrough. If you did find the video useful, be sure to like and subscribe down below. That makes sure that YouTube is going to show you future videos from us more likely. While you're down there, leave a comment with any questions, feedback, or additional video requests that you have. I actually started this whole series of kind of the standard user perspective because of a comment that we got that I thought was really insightful. Last but not least, if you do need any help with training or implementation of Zoho, make sure to head on over to zenatta.com and click on Book a Meeting. We're always happy to chat about how we can help on your Zoho installation. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time.